Back in 1876, just a boy of 13, a young Oglala Lakota named Black Elk, known among his people as Hahakasapa, found himself in the thick of the fight at Little Bighorn. Though barely more than a child, he showed the heart of a warrior. He even took the scalp of a fallen soldier, an act that sealed his place in the long memory of the Great Plains. You see, Black Elk wasn't just any youth, he was kin to Crazy Horse himself, a second cousin to the man who led from the front and never backed down. That connection put Black Elk in a rare spot to see the battle unfold, not just with his eyes, but with the understanding of one raised in a time when every day was a matter of survival. He saw it all, the thunder of hooves, the cries of warriors, the panic in the faces of Custer's men as they were overrun. The combined forces of the Lakota, Cheyenne, and Arapaho didn't just win a fight that day, they carved a moment into the bedrock of American memory. Not a single one of Custer's direct command lived to tell the tale. The fight burned hot and fast beneath the summer sun, over almost before it had begun. But to the people of the plains, it echoed on. Crazy Horse had already bloodied General Crook's nose at the Battle of the Rosebud, not long before the last stand. Some say if he'd called more warriors from the villages that evening, he might have crushed the U.S. troops outright under the cover of early morning shadows. Earlier that same year, during a bitter March snow, he'd led his people in a fierce defense of their Powder River encampment, what the Lakota call the moon when the eyes are blinded by snow. That kind of resolve doesn't come from training, it comes from living. By late June, their village was laid out along the Greasy Grass, a stretch of land sacred to them, fertile, protected, alive with memory. Teepees dotted the banks of the swollen river, fed by snowmelt from the Bighorns. It was a gathering of clans. Hunkpapas downstream, the Oglalas next, followed by the Minneconjous, Sans Arcs, Blackfeet, Two Kettles, and others, stretching up toward the Yanktonai in the north. From a hill nearby, a man could see forever, mountains rising like old bones beyond the cottonwoods, the bluffs scarred with gullies. That same day, Black Elk had joined a healing ceremony for a warrior named Rattling Hawk, who'd been shot through the hip at Rosebud. The medicine man, Harry Chin, believed in the power of dreams, specifically, one where a bear had shown him the path to healing. Black Elk and a handful of boys were painted and dressed to play the part of bear spirits. Yellow across his face, black stripes down the sides of his nose, his hair tied up to look like ears, Black Elk stepped into something ancient. And as the ritual unfolded, he was swept up in a feeling he couldn't explain, as if the wind had carried him above the earth. It left him with a sense of warning, something looming just over the horizon. Later, after the ceremony, the boys washed off in the river. The whole camp was alive with stories from Rosebud, laughter, singing, the flicker of firelight. That night, Black Elk helped bring in the horses. The stars turned slowly above them as the celebration rolled on, but a weight hung in the air. Something was coming. At first light, Black Elk's father sent him to help graze the horses. He gave him a long rope. If trouble came, it would make it easier to gather the animals and run. A small thing, but wise. As the sun climbed higher, the boys waded into the river to cool off. His cousin stayed behind to watch the herd. But as he rubbed grease on his arms, that same eerie feeling returned. A knot of dread, as though fate were circling. And then the cry rang out from the Hunkpapa camp. The soldiers are coming. They're charging. The alarm rolled through the valley like a drumbeat. The soldiers are coming. Even the Santas and Yanktonai heard it. The Oglala crier took up the call, each shout more urgent than the last. Everyone rushed to secure their horses, and we were lucky to have ours close at hand. My elder brother, astride a sorrel horse, galloped toward the Hunkpapas. I was sitting astride a buckskin when all hell started to break loose. My brother let out a cry and bolted toward the Hunkpapa camp, without his pistol, of all things. My father caught it right away, turned to me, and told me plain and sharp, "Go after him. Get that gun back." He handed me the revolver, my six-shooter, the one my aunt had given me, and I kicked my pony into a gallop, heading straight after him. Just beyond the edge of the Hunkpapa village, things were already boiling over. A wall of dust hung thick in the air, kicked up by warriors who'd barely shaken the river water off their backs. The camp was in a stir. Soldiers rolled in on tall horses, casting long shadows and looking every bit like the hammer about to fall. Gunfire cracked through the haze. My brother waved me off, yelling over the chaos to turn back. But he was already moving toward a stand of trees behind the camp, and I wasn't about to let him go in there alone. We cut through the confusion and rode toward the timber, just as women and children were fleeing downstream, their figures scattering up the hills behind us like leaves in a windstorm. By the time we reached the trees, a number of Hunkpapa warriors had already gathered. The air was tight with tension. Bullets tore through the branches above us, knocking leaves loose and making the forest feel alive with danger. Through the dust, I caught only glimpses of what was happening in the village below: too much smoke, too much noise. Cries rang out among the warriors, "Stand firm. Don't break like women." It wasn't an insult, it was a call to steel the heart, to hold the line. Around us, the unarmed, women, the young, the old, struggled to breathe, panic heavy in their eyes. I think it was right around then that Gaul stepped forward, put himself in the center of the storm, and stopped the retreat cold. I stayed among the trees a while longer, thinking about a vision I'd had. It wasn't just a memory, it was something that settled deep in my bones. It told me our people weren't just flesh and blood, we were born of thunder, and that day would not belong to the soldiers. And then, like the wind itself changed direction, we heard it. A shout ripped through the noise: "Crazy Horse is coming!" Eagle bone whistles pierced the air. From the north and west, his war cries rolled in like thunder. The valley turned darker, full of dust and smoke. Shadows danced between the trees, hooves beat the earth like war drums, and gunfire erupted all around. Off to my left, I heard the soldiers' horses pulling back into the brush. Their steel shoes rang against the rocks as they retreated, shots still cracking in the air. We broke through the underbrush at a hard clip, the brush slapping our legs, and suddenly we were in the thick of it. Dust hung low, men shouting, horses pressing forward, chaos swallowing everything. The soldiers were scrambling upstream, and everyone, warriors, women, kids, was caught in a churn of noise and motion. I didn't see much in the confusion, just glimpses, like a Lakota charging headlong at a soldier. The man didn't flinch. He held firm and fired when the warrior grabbed his horse's bridle. Dropped him on the spot. I was too small to press into the fray. Couldn't reach the front. Couldn't do much. I was stuck in the middle of a storm I barely understood, swept along like a dry leaf. Soon the fight spilled into the river. Horses and men crashing into the water, the noise so sharp and steady it reminded me of hail pounding a roof. I ended up in the river too. Couldn't say how long. It was a mess of limbs, yelling, hooves kicking under the surface. When we made it to the bank, some of our people were already pulling clothes and gear off the dead soldiers. One of them was still moving. A warrior turned to me and said, "You, go scalp him." I hesitated, but got off my horse and tried. His hair was short, my blade dull, and he was clenching his teeth tight. So I raised my pistol, shot him between the eyes, and finished the job. It was my first scalp. Across the river, the fight kept rolling. I saw warriors chasing soldiers up the far hill while others fell back downstream. Up above the old Santee camp, a haze of dust rolled over the rise. Our warriors were darting in and out like swallows, rifles cracking every few seconds. I rode toward the rise where the women and children had gathered. I wanted to show my mother the scalp. On the way, I passed a young woman riding with a group of men. She called out, "Stand strong, brothers, your friends are here now. Be brave. Would you have me taken while you cower?" As I rode through the Oglala camp, I spotted Rattling Hawk sitting alone inside his lodge. Just him and his old rifle, singing a low, mournful tune. "Tell me, brothers," he sang, "what can you do that I cannot?" When I found my mother, the women were singing too, tremolo calls ringing through the hills to cheer the fighters still locked in battle. When she saw what I had, she made a call just for me. I stood there for a while, watching the dust and smoke swirl like ghosts on the far bank. Riderless horses stumbled out of the cloud. The sounds of battle never stopped. A few boys my age and younger urged me to come along. We saddled up and crossed the river, heading toward the bluff. As we rode through the greasy grass, we passed gray horses bolting with empty saddles. The closer we got to the ridge, the more bodies we saw. By the time we arrived, most of the soldiers were already down. Some still alive, but not many. More boys had joined by then. We circled the wounded, firing arrows. I saw one soldier twitching with arrows in him. Tried to take his coat, but a man shoved me aside and grabbed it. Then I saw something gleaming on the man's belt. I snatched it, a golden, round thing that caught the sun. I wore it on a leather cord around my neck. At first it ticked. Then it didn't. Took me a long while to figure out it was a pocket watch, and even longer to learn how to wind it. We climbed the bluff with the women later. Dead horses were stacked like firewood, some crushed beneath soldiers, some on top. Most of our fallen had already been taken away. The battlefield stank of blood and death, the haze so thick you couldn't tell who was who anymore. No one could point out which one was Pyanhanska. I didn't see him. There was a soldier groaning, his hands twitching toward the sky. I put an arrow in his head. His limbs jerked once, then nothing. Down the slope, some men were helping a wounded Lakota. I got closer and saw it was Black Wasaku. My cousin, Chase in the Morning's brother. He'd been shot clear through. The bullet tore through his shoulder and lodged in his hip. They were trying to treat him with what medicine they had. My father and his, upon hearing of it, rode off and found a soldier to take their anger out on. They didn't just kill him, they desecrated the body. Big man. Flesh like beef. But no one touched it beyond that. A younger boy asked me to scalp a soldier for him. I did. He ran off grinning, scalp in hand, to find his mother. Most of our warriors had driven the soldiers back up toward the mule train on the ridge. I hung back. The smell was too much. The thrill had faded. I was tired. I rode home with a small group. I wasn't sorry. Not a bit. They'd come to kill us and we answered. This was our land. Back when I'd hidden in the brush and heard those first rifle shots, I'd known it would come to this. I remembered my vision, that our people carried thunder in their blood. The soldiers didn't belong here. And they paid the price. That night, not a soul in camp slept. In the morning, word came that some of our men had stayed on the hilltop overnight. My mother and I rode out to join them. She rode a mare, the foal trotting close behind. From the ridge, we could still see some of the pack mules and cavalry horses. The soldiers had dug in tight at the base of the hill on the western side, just past a patch of bulberry bushes. A boy named Roundful was circling them. "There's a white man in that bush," he said. Sure enough, one had hidden there all night after his unit fell back. We fired arrows at him like we were flushing out a rabbit. He darted back and forth inside the brush while we circled. At one point he cried out. Then we set the grass on fire, and he bolted. Warriors dropped him before he made 10 steps. Later, we climbed higher on the hill where a few of our own were posted. We couldn't see the soldiers tucked into their fortifications, but we could see the dead animals scattered around. When we came back down and crossed the river again, a few shots cracked through the air, bullets slapping the water. By evening, my mother and I were galloping back into camp. The scouts were already back with word, more soldiers were headed our way from upstream. It was time to move out. As the sun began to dip behind the hills, we packed up what we could carry and pulled out, heading along the Greasy Grass trail toward Woodless Creek, tucked up against the base of the Bighorns. We moved under cover of darkness, the kind of slow, steady march that wears on your nerves and keeps you alert. My mother had bundled up a few pups and placed them in the travois that I shared with my younger brothers. Those pups weren't keen on staying put, they kept wriggling out, and I spent half the night chasing them down and tucking them back in. Sleep wasn't really on the table. By first light, we reached a small dry wash and made camp. We had a decent meal, meat laced with fat, rich and filling. I still remember the taste of it, and to this day, I wish I had a bite of that same meat again. We didn't linger. Around midday, we broke camp and moved out, eventually setting up again near Woodless Creek where the mountain began to rise. That's where 3 bears, badly wounded, started to seize up. He kept mumbling the word Janini, over and over. What it meant, no one could say. He passed not long after, and from then on, we remembered that place as the camp where Janini died. Later that evening, a ripple of panic swept through the camp, shouts rang out, "Soldiers! Soldiers are coming!" I scanned the ridge and, sure enough, saw men riding in uniform. But as they got closer, we realized it was our own people, just young warriors wearing the clothes they'd stripped from the fallen. They were playing around, celebrating. It rattled folks at first, but the tension faded when the scouts returned with word that the U.S. troops hadn't followed. For now, we were in the clear. That night, fires burned high across the camp, casting long shadows. The drums didn't stop, and the people danced with the kind of spirit that comes after a hard fight you manage to survive. The victory was still fresh. The air smelled like smoke and meat, and underneath it all, something older, like a knowing that the land had seen this sort of thing before. I share this account not as a grand tale, but as a thread in the larger fabric of what happened out there at the Little Bighorn. It's a piece of memory, handed down, from a young boy's eyes. If this gave you something to think about, consider subscribing and hitting the bell so you don't miss what's coming next. There's more history to uncover, and some of it may surprise you.